Okay, so I think we have quite a number of people on our webinar this evening. So I'd like to thank you everyone for coming and for joining us on this winter's evening. This is our second Troella webinar. So I'm really delighted with our speakers tonight. We have two real experts on the topic of hindgut health. The webinar is kindly sponsored by Succeed tonight. So our first speaker is Lydia Gray. Lydia works with Succeed. She is a vet, a researcher, an educator whose work connects clinical practice with evidence-based nutrition on supplement science. Lydia's professional interests include evaluating supplement efficiency, optimizing forage-based diets, and translating nutritional science into practical guidance. Lydia works with Succeed, as I mentioned, who is the sponsor of tonight's webinar. We also have Nikki Walshe, who is probably known to more of you in Ireland. Nikki is also a vet, a researcher and an educator, and is an associate professor in equine science at the University of Limerick. Nikki's expertise lies in gut health, with a particular focus on the microbiome, parasitology, and on metabolic syndrome. In her PhD, Nikki explored the relationship between microbiota, parasite infection, and inflammation. So she has a vast amount of knowledge in this area. So we really do have two experts on what is, sometimes a subject that I think not a lot of people know about. And I think actually, even in human medicine, we're now starting to recognize how important the microbiome is. And I've spoken to a couple of medical professionals who think we're actually very far ahead in the equine world with what we do know. So just a bit of housekeeping about the webinar tonight. It is being recorded, and that recording will be available on our website next week. There's a lot of people on the webinar, so if you have any questions, if you can put them into the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on them. And I think that's about it. I think everybody hopefully knows who Troella are at this stage. I suppose I'll just give just a quick update. We're an organisation that's involved in supporting thoroughbreds as they exit the racing industry, and this webinar series really is about providing education pieces, particularly the information is relevant to all horses, but we're trying to particularly aim it to areas that might be of interest to thoroughbred owners and retrainers. We have another webinar coming up in 2 months' time, and that's going to be on gastric ulcers. So we're trying to do this every 2 months just to keep those information pieces coming. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Lydia to go first. Lydia, I think you're going to talk to us about the normal anatomy of the horse's gut and explain how digestion works. And then you're going to introduce us to the more common diseases and conditions of the gut, in particular the hindgut. And maybe finally at the end of your presentation, you might let us know what you think owners can do to keep the gut in good health.
Yeah, we'll see if I get all that done. It's a big challenge. All right, so here we go. The slide is up. It is not advancing. There it goes. Okay. So this is a very complicated diagram of the horse's GI tract. And basically you can see that the food particles, I wonder if you can you see my little cursor, the hand? Okay, so here are the food particles, and they're going in the chompy end, and then they work their way through and become the digestive process makes them smaller. They get it when they're small enough, they get absorbed through the wall of the intestine, and then what's not used for nutrition comes out the other end. One thing I wanted to mention, and Nikki will get into this more when she mentions the role of the gut in the immune system, is notice how, in essence, you've got an opening here and a solid tract, one piece, and then an opening here. In essence, the digestive system is outside the body, right? And it's only when you blow this up microscopically, this wall, this lining that keeps the outside, from the inside here. So let me see if I can advance the way I did before. There we go. So there is it. That's it. That's the digestive system, and there you have it. So no, I've actually got
I
more.
like that, Lydia. That was great.
So
I'll do the
I'm gonna
same.
keep a great job. How do you, Nikki? I'm gonna keep adding illustrations. that are going to just continue to get more and more detailed. So this one is not only the structures, and we've called them out by name, and we get a little bit more of a look to them, but also the what happens in each area, so the function. And so you've got the choppers up here again. Now, they've pulled out the salivary glands. These are not ears. Interestingly enough, in horses whose diet is predominantly forage, horses don't have amylase in their saliva. Amylase is one of the enzymes that begins to break down carbohydrates. And so it's further proof that the horse was designed by committee, because that seemed like a really bad idea. So for horses, you can scratch this part off because they don't have the enzyme needed to start breaking carbohydrates down. So is this how you guys would spell esophagus? Because you probably noticed by now that I am not from Ireland. And in fact, I've never been there, but I'm hoping to get an invite maybe after this evening. So the esophagus is just the 4 to 5 long tube that carries food to the stomach. Oh gosh. We're going to get to a slide here in a minute that's going to have a lot of imperial, not metric numbers on it. And so I'm hoping somebody might be willing to take out their phone and do some calculations, but 4 to 5 feet, so like a meter and a half or something. I don't know.
Don't worry, Lydia.
Maybe.
Half of us are probably
Okay.
old enough to remember the old system, and the rest watch enough
Oh, all
American
right. All right.
TV, so we'll be fine.
Okay. Okay. So moving on to the stomach, this is where protein digestion begins. And I kind of think of it as I'm sure you have these over there, like a cement truck. It's sort of the mixer and the grinder that keeps things moving. The pancreas provides enzymes, the liver provides bile salts, and then you get into the small intestine where the bulk of the digestion and absorption occurs. Then to the large intestine, which begins with the cecum, which is in here, didn't really show up. And that's the cecum is what we call the fermentation vat. It's where the microbes really begin to take over the process, and then resulting in energy for the horse through volatile fatty acids, and that's where salts and water gets absorbed, and then what's not absorbed goes out the other end. So now here are those numbers I talked about. So this over here is the front end of the horse, and of course this end is the back end. But important to remember with the horse versus other domestic species is their stomach is quite small proportionally to the rest of them. And so some of the conditions that horses are prone to, colic, is because Hindgut acidosis, their stomach is so small. It's only 9 to 10% of the entire digestive system, and it can be overwhelmed, and things get back to the hindgut where they're not supposed to. They were never, Mother Nature never intended them to get back there. And then chaos ensues. So we go from the mouth to the esophagus to the stomach, which is I think about 2 gallons. And so for you guys, more like 4-ish liters or so. The small intestine, which is made up of the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Do I want to know how you would pronounce those 3?
We say duodenum.
Duodenum, and and then you still say jejunum,
Kinda.
and
Depends.
ileum.
Yeah, ileum's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great. All right. So the 3 parts there, they end up into this blind-end sac, the cecum fermentation vat, which is a little over a meter long. And then after spending some time there being fermented, what's left moves on into the large colon. And the small colon has these cyculations. After the water's been pulled out here, the dehydrated mass and the cyculations are what make your fecal balls. And then out they go. I wanted to point out in this slide that the curlicues make me think of it, is that it's called the small intestine, not because it's short in length, because you can see it's 70 feet. it's because it's the small diameter intestine. And likewise, this is the large diameter intestine. And you see that the large intestine is the cecum and the large and small colon. And I've got another slide coming up. But first, for the people who are list readers, and that includes me, I wanted to put these parts of the digestive tract in a list, in a nice numbered list, and then spell everything out in case you weren't able to understand me. So again, it's just mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, large intestine, cecum, large and small colon, and then rectum and anus. Okay, this takes the last image and puts it inside the horse, so you can see whereabouts all the different organs are. And notice that this one doesn't actually float above, but it's in shadow here and off to the side because it's on the right side of the horse. So if you're sitting on the horse and looking forward, it would be kind of under and behind your right leg. And that's why it's shown the way it does. But I think people would be surprised to see that the large colon, which we'll talk about the distinct sections of it in a moment, pretty much goes all the way from the horse's pelvis up to the forelimbs. And it is right under where the girth lies and where the rider's leg is, on both the left and the right sides. And the stomach is this is its size and location compared to the rest of the tract. So this is the really fun part. This is why we pay the big bucks to go to vet school. So the bottom of your screen, I've lost, there it is. The bottom of your screen is the back end of the horse, and the top then of course is the front end. And let's start over here, and you can all see my cursor, right? I'm not just waving around indiscriminately, nilly-willy. All right, so where this says A, there's this black arrow. This is the small intestine, the third section, the ileum coming in. And this is the cecum, what we call the fermentation vat. When food leaves the cecum, then it goes to the right ventral colon. That's this section right here. Ventral meaning bottom and right. So think about you sitting on top of that horse again. This structure is under your right leg, and the furthest one against the belly wall, the abdominal wall, or the close to the ground, I should say. Then we come around the front of the horse, right on top of the sternum. So this is called the sternal flexure, and it goes to the left ventral colon. Notice this is number 5 is very important, and it's why horses just weren't designed quite properly, and why we have some troubles. This is the pelvic flexure, and you notice this this large diameter, as I said before. It all of a sudden, it not only gets really small in diameter, but it twists and turns on itself. And that's an area where a lot of impactions happen, because you've got a lot of feed stuff coming down this way, and depending on the hydration of it and the motility, it may get jammed up right in there. One thing this picture is a little bit misleading about is it's not that this right ventral and left ventral colon are outside the dorsal, meaning top colon, or that it's bigger or something. Think of it as sitting on top of it. So you've got, can't really do it with my hands, but you've got two U-shaped organs sitting right on top of each other. And what this pelvic flexure does, it doesn't go to the side, it comes right back on top of it. So this number 6, which is the left dorsal colon, sits right on top of this number 4, the left ventral colon. The Succeed company that I consult for gave us garbage bags and tubes and pipes and twisties and all sorts of things, and we made a life-size version of this this summer in the office. And it was really really helpful to be able to see how all these parts fit together and how tricky it was to keep them together without those twitchy ties. All right, so we've been through now the pelvic flexure, and now we're into the dorsal or the top part. Because you think about it, if you think where the rectum and anus is, we have to get to the top of the digestive tract in order to be able to come out. So now we've done that. We're up at the top, and we're at left dorsal colon. Now we're making our turn here at the diaphragmatic flexure, and we come to number 8, which is the right dorsal colon. This is another problematic stretch of intestine because it's the shortest and the widest and the most fixed in that it's attached to the body wall, where the other pieces, the other segments have some a little bit more freedom and flexibility. So we'll hear in a moment why this is a problem. And then again, we shorten or smaller, as my German writing friend says, smallering the diameter, and we get to the transverse flexure, and now the large colon transitions to the small colon. Most of the water has been absorbed, and now we're using those saccules to make fecal balls, and away they go. So that was my favorite part of the talk so far. I just love getting into the nitty-gritty. I think this is nitty-gritty, but Nikki is going to get into the itty-bitty nitty-gritty. So you think this is refined. Her stuff is going to be, it's going to just knock your socks off. So you've seen this a little bit now. You have an idea that we have stomach, small intestine, cecum, colon, and rectum. Again, here are your sizes. But now we've added the dimension of the stomach and the small intestine together they make up the foregut. And then the cecum and the colon make up the hindgut. And one of the biggest distinctions between these two is that in the foregut, that's where digestion begins, and it begins by the horse himself, the horse's own enzymes. The horse's body makes enzymes that can break down or make smaller protein, fat, and carbohydrates so that the small intestine can absorb them, because they're not going to be able to absorb those big chunks of protein. The small intestine absorbs the building blocks of protein, which are amino acids. And likewise, the horse isn't absorbing a giant stretch of starch. They're absorbing it after it gets broken down by enzymatic dialysis. The simplest part of a carbohydrate, a sugar, in this case, usually glucose. So, and then in the hindgut, there's types of carbohydrates that can't be broken down by horse enzymes. They have there's alpha bonds, there's beta bonds, and only the bacteria, the microbes in the hindgut can break down those beta bonds. And that's where fermentation occurs. That starts in the cecum and continues on. So the horse relies upon the microbes in the hindgut to help digest part of its food. And in fact, most of the horse's energy or calories come from the volatile fatty acids here. There it is. Volatile fatty acids, or VFAs, you might hear one of us say, that are the result of this fermentation process, fermenting the carbohydrates. And the end result is volatile fatty acids. And of course, B vitamins and vitamin K. Guess I have to keep pushing the button for the whole thing to come on. I think that's the last one. Okay. This one is really cool because it shows you in the different sections what happens to each of the three main types of nutrients. So proteins, fats, and starch. When it comes to proteins, we get our first enzymes that the horse produces in the stomach, and they break down these giant proteins into shorter segments called peptides, and then additional enzymes that are released that are found in the small intestine further break the peptides down into amino acids, and it's these individual amino acids that can be absorbed uh, in the small intestine. Occasionally, they they overwhelm the small intestine, bypass it, whatever you want to say, and they get into the large intestine, and the microbes can use them. So, and then fats, it's with the action of bile salts and lipases, they're broken down into fatty acids and then monoglycerides and absorbed. And now the starch one is where it really gets interesting. Oh, and I should point out that when you see a beige colored rectangular box, that's the site of absorption. And then the yellow Pac-Man looking thing with these giant lips, I guess, maybe their teeth, those are supposed to be microbes. Okay, so I said before that horses don't have amylase, or I shouldn't say never, maybe a little bit, but that's not the sole source of it in their saliva. So I just crossed this one out. There's not a lot of starch breakdown that happens in the mouth or that's started by enzymes in the saliva. So the first of it occurs really in the small intestine. And we have a number of carbohydrate enzymes that eventually break the sugars and starches down to their smallest unit, which is the glucose. Starch that cannot be broken down by enzymes that the horse has. It has those beta bonds. That'd be like a cellulose and a hemicellulose, or that's here, or starch that bypasses the stomach and small intestine because it was overwhelmed, like in a grain overload type situation. Those come down to the large intestine, beginning with the cecum, and they're fermented by the bacteria. The blue VFAs here are good bacteria that fermented the right carbohydrate and produced butyrate, propionate, and acetate, the volatile fatty acids that are desirable. And then when you overwhelm the normal, tract pathway, then you have bacteria that are not supposed to be there in high numbers, and they're not supposed to be fermenting, and you get different volatile fatty acids that are not as safe. And this is the situation, this is the process by which eating the wrong thing can cause your horse to develop laminitis. That's a function of these naughty bacteria and these incorrect VFAs. So again, for the list people, here are the different segments of the GI system, and here is what they do. So really the mouth, saliva is necessary to wet the feedstuff and allow the horse to safely swallow it and to provide the right hydration so that the ingestion can move along the digestive tract. And it provides not amylase, but sodium bicarb, which is important in buffering because we know the stomach has acid. And in 2 months, you'll learn more about that. Esophagus is just for transport. The stomach is where digestion begins, specifically protein digestion, and it also does a mixing. So it churns and mixes the ingesta so that the acids and the enzymes are able to penetrate all of the feedstuffs. And then we have the small intestine, which is really maybe the workhorse, at least on the horse's side of it, as far as digestion absorption. The cecum and the rest of the large intestine is where your fermentation happens, and where you have loads and loads of tiny bugs and water absorption. And then your small colon and rectum form the fecal balls. Keep them till you're down center line at a horse show, and then dump them right at X. That's the job of the anus. So I don't know why mouth and esophagus is on here twice, but that's what happens when you finish your your talk the day that it's due. Okay. I myself was just talking with Andrea and Nikki, and I'm a carriage driver, and I drive two minis, but mine are a bit more lean, mean driving machines than this little guy. So I'm going to move from, how are we doing on time, Andrea? Am I taking up Nikki's time? We doing okay?
No, you're okay. You probably have about another 10 minutes or so, so
Maybe,
you're
okay.
fine. This
All
is
right, so
fascinating. I've never seen the digestion explained so well. You feel after all these years, I'm still learning so much. How can I be still learning at this stage? But anyway, there you go.
so
No,
I'm
keep
going to move
going.
into from the structure, the anatomy, and the function, what they do, into the dysfunction, or what happens when, what kind of things can happen when it doesn't go right. And so these are some of the more common, I guess. Hindgut. I stayed with hindgut because I didn't want to move into others' territory. But so colitis is, and veterinary medicine is based on Latin. So if you don't know what a word means, just do perform an enzymatic digestion on it and break it down into smaller bits. And here you get colon and itis. And itis means inflammation. So it's inflammation of the colon. Um, there, that right dorsal segment of the colon that I mentioned earlier is the place where colonic ulcers or hindgut ulcers really like to form, because it's of its parameters. It's a bit short and wide and fixed in space and other reasons. But and then we have IBD, which is inflammatory bowel disease, and as its name tells you, inflammation. Hindgut acidosis. This is where, I mentioned before in that one slide that when the foregut or the stomach and small intestine is overwhelmed by too much um, simple carbohydrates, the sugar, classic sugar overload or carb overload, and it bypasses that and goes right to the cecum and the large intestine, then those segments get overwhelmed. The wrong bacteria do the fermenting, and the pH drops. We get byproducts that are not what they should be, and it sets up a whole cycle. Fecal water syndrome. The word syndrome is your clue that we don't know what causes this, or more than one thing causes it. Because if you're a disease, then you have the word disease in your name. And if you're a syndrome, like for years and years, it was navicular syndrome. And as we now have better imaging and we're able to figure out which exact part in the foot is the problem, we have less and less navicular syndrome and more specific disease names. Nikki will explain to you the role of parasites and what damage they can do in the hindgut. And of course, you have your classic colics, although we know that colic is a sign, and just all it means is pain in the abdomen, and it can be like in that one picture, from the front legs to the back legs. So it does not necessarily mean GI system, but it usually is. Gas is probably the most common, and then impaction, but you can have some surgical dysfunctions, displacements, and twists. We would call those like a volvulus. And also laminitis, some of them begin as a hindgut dysfunction, and then they progress to a hoof dysfunction. So possible signs of hindgut dysfunction, and two keys here. Well, one is that you'll hear me say signs and you'll never hear me say symptoms, because symptoms are something that people get, like, oh, I have a headache. Animals don't get symptoms, they get signs. And maybe that's an American veterinary college thing, but boy, somebody sure hammered that into me. And I never say symptoms. I always say signs. The other key thing to note on this slide is that none of let me see if I can go back one. Yeah, none of these really have, well, I guess fecal water syndrome. Other than fecal water syndrome, none of these really have, favorite word, pathognomonic signs, meaning that any of these signs can really point you to any of these. And it's the journal that you keep, we'll talk about in a minute, and
Sorry, Lydia,
the workup.
can I interrupt
Yeah,
you for
yeah,
a moment? I
yeah.
actually don't know. What is fecal water syndrome? I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the
Oh,
term, so maybe we call it something different
it
here.
could be.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's called free fecal water. Does no? Okay. Fecal water syndrome, different from diarrhea, is when a horse may defecate normally and the fecal balls look normal, but at the end of the defecation
Oh, okay.
comes
Yeah.
out clear, well,
Yeah.
brown, but runny water. Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah. I've seen that. I didn't know there was a name for it, but okay,
Oh yeah.
I know
Yeah, and
what you
it's a
mean. Okay.
syndrome. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, except for that one, all of the other all of the other hindgut dysfunctions, you might see one, two, or more of these. Colic is a sign. It's not a diagnosis. Diarrhea is a sign. It's not a diagnosis. Same for weight loss, lack of appetite. All of these, they're signs, but they point you to a diagnosis, but they aren't what's wrong. Here's just a sort of a basic workup. This is the initial workup where the veterinarian starts. And then depending on what these tell them, then they may recommend additional tests. These begin to get more invasive, like gastric endoscopies just requires fasting and sedation. Rectal biopsy is cutting. Abdominocentesis, the belly tap is poking. Um, Abdominal rectal ultrasound is sticking. So, these begin to be a little bit more invasive and more expensive. These are ones you can do on the farm that day and maybe get some results back in a couple days. And the important thing is that workups, diagnostic tests, especially for hindgut issues, they sometimes rule they're used to rule out versus ruling in. So there's no tube long enough, no endoscope tube long enough to tell us, oh, the jejunum is a problem or oh, the cecum. But if you do a gastric endoscopy and the stomach looks beautiful, then it's not that. You've ruled that out. And that's many times how you get to the diagnosis for a hindgut issue is it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Therefore, it's one of these two things. And then you keep going. I think that's a good place for me to stop. I will tell you that full disclosure, complete transparency, this image was created by AI. So, in
Okay, so
case
they don't have
anyone,
unicorns in the US, Lydia.
no, no, we don't.
I
So, in case
I
anyone was
have
wondering,
I have a quick question.
sure.
So I have to say, I think it was very interesting. I never really fully understood that the protein absorption only happens in the stomach. And as you were discussing that,
Small
I thought
intestine, oh,
of,
digestion, stomach,
sorry, yeah,
absorption,
yeah.
small intestine. Yeah.
Yeah, just that digestion, I suppose, is the word I'm looking for. And it made me think about the high protein diets that thoroughbreds are often on, and I suppose, is that really an important point then, to get people to spread out those feeds because particularly in racing yards, you'll see sometimes horses getting, maybe quite a big feed and high protein feed because of the level of performance they're doing and similar performance horses at a high level. So is that something we really need to consider if they
Well,
only digest the proteins in that small place, do we need to think about the size of the feeds when it's a high
let
protein
me
diet?
throw let me throw another wrench in the mix. I think is the saying. If if protein digestion begins in the stomach because of acids that are cleaved into their active form, pepsinogen is the one I'm thinking of. If you are suppressing the acid production with a pharmaceutical, how much protein digestion is really happening then? Because those enzymes aren't there to start breaking it down into polypeptides and peptides and amino acids. That's the real question is what harm are we doing to our horses by suppressing acid? Because some acid is supposed to be there. It has a function to begin the process of digestion. Unless you activate enzymes through acid to their active state, there's no, they're not going to be able to help digest.
That's a really interesting point. So it's like a vicious cycle then, the more of that type of food they get, the more acid problems, and then you try and break the acid, then that,
Yeah,
so
so I guess the
yeah,
point of that
interesting.
is until we know that, let's do what we can to avoid um, excessive acid in the stomach and avoid all those things that they'll talk about in 2 months that trigger gastric ulcers. Let's keep the stomach healthy so we don't need the pharmaceuticals.
So if your horse is performing, at quite an intense level, if you're out, eventing every weekend and you want to get the protein level up in the diet, then is the best thing to do to break down those feeds into smaller amounts more frequently, or, if it all happens, all that protein digestion and absorption happens in the small intestine, how do you deal with that and still get the level of protein into the diet that you want?
I think I'm going to continue to not answer your question and rephrase it. But unless you are, well, racing, which is a lot of where your horses come from, but I'm assuming that when you rehome them, they're not going back into racing. They may be going into eventing, but unless they're eventing at the advanced level, I mean, horses don't need tremendous amounts of protein, you know? And when we talk about them needing protein, we're supposed to say they don't need protein, they need amino acids, blah, blah. But I mean, they don't need, they're not, cats, which are obligate carnivores and must have protein. That's all they eat. I mean, the horses don't, if you provide horses with what the NRC says they need based on their workload, light, moderate, heavy, and you're honest about their workload, that I think your normal 2 or 3 feedings of their grain divided, you don't have to do anything extra, I guess is what I'm saying, to get enough protein in them.
Okay,
That's
great.
my feeling. Nikki, I don't know
Great. No,
what your
thank you.
feeling
Well,
is.
I can see Nikki nodding along there and chomping at the bit to get in on this discussion.
Excuse
So,
the pun, is it, Andrea?
that's it. It's all about the horses tonight.
I'm telling you.
Nikki, I'm going to ask you. Well, thank you very much for that, Lydia. It was really informative. And I think before you can understand kind of the microbiome and what it all means, then it's really important to understand the background and the digestion. So thank you for taking us through that. And as I say, I learned loads as always.
Yeah, I'd second that, Andrea. I was there going, oh, that makes much more sense.
Yeah, I know.
And you
Don't tell
explained it so
everyone
well,
else if
Lydia.
you're thinking that, Nikki.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway, so Nikki, I'm going to ask you to tell us about what a balanced microbiome actually means for a
Yeah.
horse and what causes it to become unbalanced. And then, following on my not so clever questions, maybe you can talk about what owners can do to prevent an unbalanced microbiome and in their horses, and maybe demystify some of those myths that we have about what we should feed our horses. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Look,
thank you.
as in Andre said, a tall task there, but certainly go through the slides and whatever I've missed, we can discuss after. And just leading on from actually beautifully leading on from your conversation with Lydia, I think, it's I just wonder about the narrative around how we feed the gut of the horse. So this is why I picked the engine behind the horse, because I think sometimes we think the engine behind the horse is that bucket of hard feed, the rolled oats and everything else that we use. But I wonder, hopefully, by the end of what I've put together, you might think a little bit differently about that. So, um, and yeah, if there's any words that come up and things like that that people make no sense or I haven't explained properly, please just throw it into the chat and Andrea will interrupt me and I can come back with something that's better explained if I fail to do so. So what I mean by the gut being an ecosystem is that I think sometimes we make things simple, and when we make things simple we lose the essence of what they are, and if anyone tries to make things simpler for you, from parasitology to gut microbiota, um I would question it. Nothing's ever black and white, I suppose. And just to add to Lydia's previous slides and maybe throw in some metrics, Lydia, that suit me a bit better because I'm not as good with those. Is that I'm going to talk about the hindgut, and that's 30 meters in length. Sorry, Lydia, if I've got these wrong. 150 liters, usually in regards to the digestive that it can hold, and trillions of bacteria. Like I cannot explain. I can't even comprehend. I can't even write the number of how many bacteria we think, don't know, we think are in the hindgut of a horse. And that, like, even in one drop of cecal fluid, we could have a billion bacteria. And that from the very beginning, guys, should really start you to question all you know about things that manipulate bacteria. Because if one drop of the fluid that sits in your cecum of your horses has a billion bacteria, then it's very difficult to cultivate that with some of the things that are out in the market. And then I suppose back to your point, Andrea, if we think about that, approximately 70% of the actual energy that a horse needs in their daily, and I mean this like as an abundance piece. So 70% of whatever that energy they need, whether they be a racehorse or as that tiny little pony, it comes from the hindgut. And if we don't start to feed the hindgut with that in mind, and we keep feeding the foregut with these buckets that we think we're feeding them with, we won't actually get the performance we want. We'll just get the continuous gastric upset that we have in our horses, and that we have spent loads of money trying to fix. So the other thing that's that I want to preface my talk in is that we don't know very much about the gut microbiome in the horse. I'm not saying this to make myself feel better, or I don't know why I chose this topic to study in general, but if you look at even as a research topic, right, this was a number of papers that I did yesterday on PubMed and the like, and we have 269 papers specifically around the gut microbiota of the horse, and there's 17,300 on human gut microbiota. And even the human clinicians, or the human microbiologists, if you will, or even bioinformaticians, would say there's still so much to find out. So back to the point, if anyone's telling you they know about it, they don't know what they don't know. And I think the thing to remember is that sometimes we think gut flora and we think bacteria, which is great, and there is an abundance of it. But there's also archaea, which are these fancy little weirdo fellas that hang out there. There's viruses, okay? There's active viruses that are part of the natural ecosystem of the horse. And most importantly, there's parasites. And horses in particular have developed over thousands and thousands of years with parasites as part of their ecosystem. And it's only when we took over and made them eat in their toilets is when we messed it all up, right? So, again, when we're thinking about drugs we give, or bacterial products or whatever, just remember that this is an ecosystem that's finely balanced and quite diverse. So we don't really want to be getting rid of any of it without a thought process involved.
Nikki, can I just jump in and tell you how amazing that diagram in the upper right-hand corner is? Because you can see, since yours is an actual like necropsy,
Dead
that
horse,
you can
yes.
see how that right dorsal colon is short and fat compared to the others.
Stuck. Yes, totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. And the pelvic flexure, where all the problems are.
Yep.
It kind of pop around. And so, yeah, that was the other thing, is that when we are examining or trying to look at the microbiota of this, like, just take the hindgut alone, right? Like, most of the time, the majority, maybe I think we're now the fourth study that has used like actual biopsies, or cut a sample from the inside of the wall of the cecum, the wall of the large colon, etc. Most of the time, our studies are based on feces. And as you can imagine, to try and get samples from horses, unfortunately, unless they're in surgery, but even then we can't really get samples, because most of the time if they're in surgery for an intestinal problem, then you can't look at the normal, if that makes sense. So we work off feces all the time, but of course feces don't represent the horse, right? Feces only represent probably the last bit of the dorsal colon, the small colon, and the rectum, and what comes out of the anus. And yet we're trying to use that as a proxy for so many aspects of the horse's intestine. And as Lydia has beautifully explained to you, they're all very different, different in size, different in function. And so again, even the research we have done, including my own, is really unreliable in regards to our understanding of exactly what's going on within the gut. And so that's why I still call it a black box, because it's such a hard thing to effectively research, basically. But we do know bits, right? So let's go into that. And so when we talk about a balanced microbiome, as Andrea was kind of asking at the preface, is that it needs to be diverse. What you want is a population that has a multitude of different bacteria. I mean, thousands and thousands of different species. Okay. And not this, good bacteria versus bad bacteria. Like, for instance, one of the big ones you may have heard of are things like Clostridia. And Clostridia causing really severe disease in horses. But actually, Clostridia makes up the predominant families within the phyla that we have examined within horses, right? So you send in something like metronidazole, which is a drug that's associated with killing off Clostridia, just as, to cover your bases. You're actually going to really disrupt a huge aspect of the natural core microbiome of a horse. Similarly, there's smaller communities that we don't know an awful lot about, but their influence could be quite distinct in regards to the metabolizing effects of those bacteria. And so we could go in and interfere with them without even knowing and without even being able to see on a fecal sample, and they could have a significant effect. And so what you really want, just like us, is you want, you would have heard about the Mediterranean diet, 30 different fruits and vegetables, and the more colorful your plate and whatever. Well, with horses, the more forage-based your plate is, the more diversified their forage-based diet is, the better, because that's what's feeding this fermentation vat that provides 70% of their energy, right? And as you can see in the little diagram right alongside it, that's meant to be the gut wall, okay? So as Lydia described, you have the outside and the inside, and the gut wall is what lines us, right? And along that gut wall is our blood circulation, okay? And as the nutrients come in through the gut wall leave it off into the bloodstream. That's what it's meant to do. Beautiful. It's meant to protect you and keep all the bacteria on the far side. All right. That's its whole point. And when it's happy and when it's in good form, and when the bacteria are maintained in a way that, well, not just bacteria, that all those microbes are maintained in a way that they're meant to, everyone's happy out, and the junctions are what we call tight. Okay. So see the lads all holding hands there. However, oh yeah, sorry, one extra point. When it comes to the good microbiome, right? It doesn't mean it's the same as someone else's. There is a core microbiome to a point, but realistically, every horse's microbiome, as much as all of us, have an individual microbiome. So the Actimels of this world that seem to be able to be taken on by everyone should be something we question, right? Because we all come from different backgrounds. All came from different moms, different dads, different environments, different grasses, etc. Well, we weren't on grasses, but you get my point. And so your microbiota is very much formulated in line with your life experience as well as your environmental exposure. Okay, so we never want them to be the same. So it's very hard to talk about products that just directly affect microbiota in a very blanket way, I suppose. So then when we have this unbalanced microbiota, what does that mean? It basically means we've gone in and we've messed with things. Okay, so that has we've aggravated some microbiota, or maybe got rid of some, and others have then grown more than others. Or we've got rid of little niches, so now they no longer hang out there because we've increased the pH, and that bacteria doesn't like that. Or, we've introduced something that has caused a mass effect across the microbiota or across other microbes such as parasites and archaea and things like that. And when it gets angry, we then get inflammation. So you would have seen in Lydia's list there, you had colitis, inflammation, hindgut acidosis, inflammation, right dorsal colitis, inflammation, right? So all these inflammatory conditions that we associate with the hindgut, okay? And when we get inflammation, suddenly all these lovely junctions that are meant to keep the outside from the inside start to spread apart. And then we get translocation, or what we call translocation, which is basically the movement of that bacteria across the walls into the bloodstream, and now you start to see problems. Okay. And also when you get movement of those tight junctions, it's because it's starting to cause damage within the gut wall, affecting nutrient absorption. The microbiota can't break down those beautiful that beautiful fiber anymore. You get decrease in your energy provision. Your horse looks lethargic. The coat goes bad. You start to see weight loss. So what do? You increase its protein intake. Okay. So, you can see now, start to see now there's like an imbalance in how we approach these things, isn't it? Like I deal with a lot of parasite related disease, and people want to recover these horses. And most of the parasites we deal with actually affect the large intestine. And people are putting buckets of feed into them, like broodmare 20% nuts, when what we need to be doing is minding or cultivating this hindgut. So what influences the gut then? Basically everything, but let's keep it kind of to a minimum. So mainstream diet, age, and environment. Okay, diet being the most important one, really. Okay, then things that can happen, so like management issues, stress, abrupt diet change, massive, and transport. Okay, and then the last one, disease, microbiota modulators, so things that are labeled or intended to change the microbiota, and drugs. Drugs is a big one. Okay, and like we just have to be so careful of, sure, it does no harm. Okay. Just, yes, but maybe not. And so I was trying to find a way of like bringing this to the table today, because obviously you guys have a specific interest around racehorses and how to manage them and their gut health. As well as probably other interests, of course, as well, but from the Troella point of view. So I said maybe we could look at the life of a racehorse through a microbiota lens, and I just took three different things that maybe help me explain bits and pieces along the way. So one of the biggest ones is weaning. There's been a good bit of stuff about weaning lately. I think you might have seen some of the headlines, around like delayed weaning is associated with increased success in thoroughbreds, and like the use of antibiotics in early life foals is associated with not as high a success rate and things like that. So there is up and coming literature anyway to maybe confirm some of the things that we might have had in our minds anyway. And so there's a couple of big things. Diet, as we said, huge influence, right? So we have a sudden reduction in milk intake. Okay, so that's already going to throw your microbes mad, particularly in the small intestine, which I don't know as much about because a lot of my work is in the large intestine. And then we get this introduction of solid feeds. And I don't know if anyone here has ever gone on like the gluten-free diet type thing. Not that you're gluten intolerant, but that gluten-free piece that a lot of people go on. And then you come home from after a couple of drinks and you decide to have a toasted cheese sandwich, right? And how you're in the horrors afterwards. Now, I haven't done that myself. I've always stayed on the bread just in case. But my point is that if you don't have the bacteria to deal with this stuff, just like in horses, and suddenly it's introduced into a situation, that's when the microbes lose their mind, because no one's there to handle it. There's complete chaos. Everyone's like, what is this? We've no community for this. So there's like gas everywhere. They start to get a bit colicky. Their poos go really runny, etc. Okay. And that's all indications that colonic environment, the large colon, isn't doing well. Because as you would have seen from Lydia's slides, it's also part of water absorption. So when you're starting to see diarrhea, it really is a good indication that large intestinal problems are at play. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, Lydia, but generally it's associated with large intestine. Then the thing that everyone does is they wean their foals, and because they've caught them and they're now in a stable, sure, it's the perfect time to worm them. So everyone gives them a wormer, right? Okay, and they mightn't have been wormed yet. And then they're wondering why a foal goes down with colic, foal goes off form, again, starting to see losing loose feces, or we're still starting to see weight loss associated with that. Because again, we already had a quite unstable microbiota environment, and now we've thrown in anthelmintics, which messes with the parasites, who are all part of that lovely ecosystem that we were meant to be trying to cultivate, okay? And then, of course, cortisol plays a massive problem. Same with ourselves, right? You know when you're stressed, when you start to get gut upset, and some people are more sensitive than others. And so this loss of dam, often they're put in a stable by themselves. They haven't really been stable before, or they're put into a new group, and there's a hierarchy that needs to be played out, and that could be very stressful for them as well. And so now you've changed the environment on top of everything else. So now we're absolutely flying with everything that we could do wrong to them at that time. Okay. On top of the fact that they are usually quite young, and so they haven't as a stable microbiota community as adults. So what is that? What we get is diet shifts and stress. So we get this reduced in microbiota diversity. And as we said at the beginning, a healthy microbiome is a lovely diverse one. Okay. And we get a decrease in our short chain fatty acids producers. So Lydia had referred to them as volatile fatty acids, same idea, right? So what you're talking about is what we break that beautiful fiber down to, i.e., the powerhouse behind that 70% of energy produced by the hindgut fermenter. We increase the risk of dysbiosis, which Andrea described correctly as an imbalance. Okay, again, it's Latin, dysbiosis, and it's gut-related disease. So what we're talking about there again is colic, probably associated with like gas buildup and tympanic colic, basically, or from my point of view, parasitic disease. And as well with the anthelmintics, we have shown that it causes a shift in microbiota, often with a decrease in that diversity. We also have shown that it's associated with an increase in inflammatory markers. And so you now have an culminative burden of weaning that is predisposing those very young animals to disease associated with hindgut problems. So what about the racehorses themselves? So obviously there's many stages on this, but I don't have enough time to go through them all. So I took that pre-race protocol. That would have been a big part of that. That would have been a big part of my job when I was down in Australia. I would have worked on the Melbourne racetrack. And so let's say we take a 3-year-old, he's in his final stage of race preparation. And what you're trying to do is, optimize him to be ready to race on the day. So what do people do? They often start to restrict forage. They usually increase the starch in the diet, or that kind of, I suppose, high concentrate feeding, which they would have probably been doing anyway. And sometimes they might decrease turnout, which was already maybe minimal in that situation. They're often put on antibiotics. Maybe they have a dirty scope. Maybe they just don't look 100%. Maybe there's some other indication that they might be put on antibiotics. And then, of
Sorry,
course,
Nikki, can I
yes,
interrupt you just for a moment? There's a few questions coming in, but I think this is flowing really well. So are you happy enough if I just wait till the end and I'll ask them, because they're kind of diverse questions? Is that all
absolutely.
right with
Whatever
you?
suits
Yeah.
you, Andrea.
Okay,
Trust
great.
you on it. Yeah. Um, and then of course there's the stress because there's an increased training load, so they're being pushed harder. There's changes in routines, and then of course the transport to the races. So again, what are we looking at here? We're looking at again that decrease in diversity, again the decrease in CFAs, increase in dysbiosis, but of course, again we're predisposing these guys to ulcers, hindgut ulcers, probably gastric ulcers in these situations as well. And then, of course, with antibiotics, we do see that there's still effects greater than 30 days after their use. So if there's multiple courses, then you have an even worse effect and again, a culminant effect. But in these horses, a lot of the time, we are decreasing the diversity on top of everything else, just in the lead up to a race. Again, taking away from where the engine really is, which is that hindgut. So the last one I wanted to do, obviously for the community that we have today, is rehoming a racehorse. So let's say you have a 4-year-old thoroughbred and he's been rehomed as a leisure horse, maybe within, a sport horse environment or a riding school environment. There's a couple of things to take into consideration. Again, let's talk environment. So they're coming from a busy training yard to a quieter yard, and in some ways you're like, oh, maybe that's better, but it's still new, and there's new aspects to it. There's new aspects to the stables they're in, what feed they're getting, etc. There's also new herd dynamics, especially if they're going to be put out with other horses, and that's all leading to that kind of cortisol piece. Okay, they have come from a very high concentrate, low forage racing diet, and we're probably going to try and push them towards a forage based leisure diet. Okay, But the thing is, they have adapted to that high energy diet. And so, again, about this abrupt change, even if it's from what we would consider not great to good, it still has to be quite slow, quite, gentle. Like, because again, back to that cultivation piece, you're trying to change that hindgut microbiota nice and slow so that the horse can adapt with it and the microbiota can adapt with it. Like, we don't want to give them a massive amount of a good forage if there's nothing there to digest it. We have to cultivate that within the microbiota. Of course,
Nikki,
again,
sorry,
yeah.
just a quick point there. So we often would recommend to people when they get a horse out of training that a really nice thing to do is turn them out for a few weeks. It, will help with the gastric ulcers and it lets them down a little bit and maybe lets them forget a bit that they were in racing.
Yes.
But to your point there, I would have been that, sure, that's great. They'll have grass and, everything will sort itself out. Now I'm thinking maybe not so much. So
Yeah.
should you keep feeding a horse, kind of step down that diet that's used to while it's out? If you have grass to turn it out, and you should
Yeah,
wind
and
it down
even
slowly.
to be honest with you, Andrea, if they're coming, like a lot of time these guys aren't that stable, let's say their diet isn't that stable anyway, and now you're putting them into a really high stress environment, you're nearly better off to leave them have half an hour of grass the first day than,
Okay.
an hour of grass and start to build that because again, one of the things that could come from that would be that hindgut acidosis because they literally, as Lydia was saying, they literally can't handle it. So
Yeah.
it leads to that, the bacteria not being able to manage it, and then that increase or change in pH that leads to inflammation and that vicious cycle. So absolutely, like you could keep them on if in my head anyway, from a microbiota point of view, if you could take the feed that they're on and bring it
Yes.
with you.
Yeah. Okay. Because the rehoming process can be quite abrupt sometimes. So
Yes,
sometimes
of
the horse is in
course.
full training and then
Yes.
it doesn't run well and that's it, it's gone the next day.
Yeah,
So
100%. Yeah. But it'd
that
be
that
like
is
someone like just making you retire and then sitting
yeah.
you. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Putting you in a chair.
yeah,
Okay, so that's a good point. So, maybe have a kind of a 2 to 3 week period, then maybe to step them down from their old life to their new life, that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, a transition period.
Okay.
And I think sometimes we forget that for their brain and their gut, and
Yeah.
both, because
Yeah.
the gut does affect the brain, so
Okay.
just like us.
Great. I'll let you carry on.
No worries, no worries. Um, and then, of course, their health history, like it's unlikely you're going to get told whether they've had prior antibiotic use, but you can definitely assume that they have. And then, are they on anything for gastric ulcers? Does it look like that they have any stress-related issues? So do their feces get looser when stress comes about? Because there are some horses who will, you know, show signs of gastric inflammation when they're under stress. Now, to be honest, there's not that many racehorses who have fully formed feces, from certainly from the ones that I would have worked with in high level environments and in Australia and New Zealand. But yeah, it's about, trying to get a feel for what is normal for that horse. And then of course the exercise piece, like they're used to going out and expending a huge amount of energy. So can you start to bring that back as well? Because that itself will also cause them stress because they don't understand where that's gone because there is an expenditure of energy that is what they're used to and what their body expects to. So there's good things to consider, I suppose. And so when we're coming again for the microbiota piece, you know, because they're a little bit more unstable, diet changes that are abrupt again will reduce those SCFAs and increase lactic acid bacteria. So that's the hindgut acidosis that Lydia was referring to. Increase colic, of course, if we just abruptly withdraw what they're used to and stick them on forage. And then, of course, that stress, right? Because they're like, well, a lot of those horses are actually almost half addicted to concentrate foods, right? Because they're so high in sugar. So they're like, where is this? Like, why isn't it coming to me? And you can actually induce more of a stress behavior associated with abrupt removal of that. And then strategies. So slow it, just like you were saying, Andrea, slow it down, do it over 2 to 3 weeks. Fiber forward approach, which I know is something Lydia would be a big fan of as well. So you're prioritizing your high quality forage over a period of time, and then try and see if you can, you know, find nice horses for them to hang out with. I don't know if that's easy or not. And avoid, in changing them from group to group and give them some time. And don't forget, like, there's some racehorses who have never seen anything but racehorses. And I think sometimes we forget that too. Like, we used to have some of the racehorses, particularly in New Zealand, and I remember they brought down like a small pony as like a companion for one of the racehorses, obviously from a smaller yard. And the amount of horses who completely lost their shit, I'm not allowed to say that, lost their reason, because they saw this small little pony they'd
Or
never seen.
white horses.
Or yeah, or black and white horses. They
Yeah.
don't like them either. They don't like baddies. So yeah, just give them time. Like there's a lot for them to take on, you know. They're being put into a whole new environment. And then surely we can just give them something. So this is something that comes up a lot. You know, people are mad to give things, and I will be in the same bracket. I'm on multivitamins myself. So you know, but we just have to be a little bit careful of what we're going to introduce into this environment that we're spending so much time now cultivating with all our forage forward approaches. Okay, so the first thing, probiotics, friend or foe. So people always ask me because again, I'm often dealing with horses recovering from parasite disease and the microbiota issues around that is like, sure, we'll put them on a probiotic, okay? So let's start with the definition. Live microorganisms that may benefit the host when given in adequate amounts. Okay, so there's two variables already in the definition, okay? And if there's a product out there that claims it has probiotic properties, but is not labeled as a probiotic, it's even further down the list in regards to its, I suppose, reliability as a product, okay? Then the thing is that there's a lot of, as I spoke to you about, you know, we barely know what the core microbiome, if we do at all, is of horses. And most microbiota is individual, okay? It's individualized. And so the evidence in horses is limited. A lot of the time, even if they do work, they're gone pretty quickly. And as we said, we're dealing with something that, like, you know, is massive and has completely different functions across its entire you know, 30 meters, okay? So if you have a problem, for instance, with cyatostone, which would be my area of interest, that's going to be in the secret and ventriculum mostly. So how do you know that what you give into that horse is going to end up in the area you want it to be? Okay. And then, as we said, you know, 1 billion bacteria and one drop of cecum fluid. So again, how do you know what you're giving is going to end up having any significant effect there? And then unfortunately there are studies that have looked at probiotics and you know, done it in a controlled way, and when they are effective can actually cause disease. And if something claims there's good bacteria in it, I always question that, because what is good bacteria? Because what is good bacteria for you might not be good bacteria for me. Okay. And so when we move on from that, then just be careful of the label claims. Okay, so there was a really nice study done by Beretta et al. In 2021, and they looked at 11 probiotic products, and none of them met their claims. Okay, none of them met their label claims, not one. All right. And most of the microbiome, when they actually examined them using culture or PCR, which is a fancy way of looking for, you would have heard it during COVID, looking for the DNA signature of bacteria, they couldn't find them. So I'm happy for people still to use them, of course, but just keep these things in mind. Choose a product that has verified strains and CFU counts, which are colony forming units. Okay, what they're saying is that they have bacteria that are live within that. Okay, use them short term and monitor for problems that will show you that the colon is not happy. So watch for the fecal consistency and the appetite of the horse. Obviously, stop if you have any problems. And if you're going to deal with horses who have a gut issue and that's why you're giving the probiotic, or foals and you want to give a probiotic, make sure you get your vet's opinion on it. But what about prebiotics? And obviously this is very topical for this particular webinar. Again, definition is a substrate that's selectively used by the gut microbes to confer health benefits. So that in itself is already making a difference, right? So it is the microbes themselves that are selecting how to use it. Does that make sense? So you're basically sending something in to try and increase the community or change the community, but it's up to the community whether they do it or not. So automatically it's I suppose safer. The common ones are inulin, oligofructose, fructo-oligosaccharides, and mannose oligosaccharides. Okay. So they may help with some abrupt diet changes, but there has been some studies that have shown that FOSs stabilize microbiota. But we have to be a little bit careful because they can alter fecal pH, and that can be good and bad, and they can alter volatile fatty acids production. In regards to risks, it's to do with dosing. So we can actually induce laminitis and enterotoxemia using oligofructose. Okay, it's a experimental model that's used. And some of them, like Jerusalem artichoke meal, has been associated with actual gastrointestinal damage. So again, if we're talking about a practical guide on this, sorry, I thought I had another slide, a practical guide. The same rules, I suppose, apply as probiotics, but it's again about how much you're giving and to what kind of horse and what's your expected outcome. Then fecal microbiota transplantation. I suppose to put this simply is what you're trying to do is take feces or poo from a normal horse, give it a mix, send it down a tube into a sick horse and see if you can make effective changes. Okay. And the reason it was quite a big thing, and it's certainly something I would have used in practice, probably as a last ditch effort. I don't know about Andrea and Lydia. But it was quite a big thing actually, back in the day, and has been revived because of its use now in humans with C. diff. Okay, but if we go back to that piece around the large intestine being giant, in C. diff, the fecal microbiota transplantation is through the colon, so through the rectum and colon, and they can actually distribute it directly into the colon because we're much smaller, whereas we can't do anything like that in horses. So we have to go through the mouth and hope that we give enough that it gets to where we want it to go. So let's start with that. So you're making a slurry from manure of a healthy donor, and you're giving it to a sick horse to attempt to restore a healthier gut microbiome. There is some promising research on this, particularly in horses who present with acute disease, and sometimes geriatric horses as well. They've shown some positive results, and it's a particular group that seems to be working on it, with some resolution of diarrhea. Their thoughts are it's not actually the microbiota that they're changing; it's what's in the slurry that's coming. So it's like almost like what you call like postbiotic, I think they call it. Lydia, is there a fancy name for that? Yeah, postbiotic. So it's what the products of the bacteria is actually within the feces, and that's what's helping because they don't actually change the microbiota in any significant way, but they do seem to improve clinically in some cases. Let's keep that. Unfortunately, most of the studies are very small. There's an inconsistency in how we go about it, which is very typical in horse research. And there seems to be conflicting outcomes. There's one very good study on antibiotic use and antibiotic-induced colitis where there was no change at all. Okay. And then there's another hospital-based one where there was. And again, we're relying on fecal samples. So we don't actually know what we're doing to the gut. We just know what's happened in regards to the change in feces. So is it a last resort or a first line defense? Well, what you'd consider really is there are benefits, but they're not guaranteed. Administration has that added effect of tubing a horse with feces, and you don't want to get that wrong. The donor quality is really important. So a horse on the same environment as your horse, who has been screened if possible for things like salmonella or the pathological clostridias that we don't like, and as well has no history of antibiotic use in the last 3 to 6 months. Okay, there's some of the baseline stuff that you would go off. And fresh feces, of course. Don't freeze it either. That's no help. But it isn't without its risks. Okay. And then of course, always do this under veterinary directed advice and stop and reassess if you're worried. So what do we summarize that to be? Slow and steady with everything when it comes to the gut. Try your best not to make big changes. If you have horses that are arriving in, don't just throw antibiotics into them. You know, if they need antibiotics, fine, but don't give it to them unless they really need it. Don't change their diet very quickly. Keep everything very, very simple. Forage is the bedrock of a good gut microbiota environment. Supplementation is tricky, and you need to keep your critical mindset at the ready. And there's always a consequence to administration of medicine. Don't ever think there isn't. And I suppose what we're trying to do is cultivate, not manipulate the horse gut microbiome. That's me, Andrea.
That is absolutely great. Well, there's lots of questions. Some of them you've already answered, but before I get on to those,
Mm.
I just wanted you to just briefly talk about high quality forage as opposed to forage. I
Oh
suppose
God.
certainly,
Yeah.
well, just very briefly, but just to maybe make the point that some of the hay we have here isn't high quality this time of year. Sometimes the grass isn't high quality. So if you don't have high quality forage, um, are there other sources of it, in terms of like chopped hay that you can add to the feed, or,
Yeah.
how can you manage to get that high quality forage in? Because all forage, I guess, isn't equal. At least that's my
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, I would agree with you. I think, chaffs, as you say, cut grass or cut hay and things like that can be definitely helpful. I suppose getting your forage tested would be a really good start. Um, I think Lydia would probably be better on this than me. I'm more on the end of like the researchy side rather than the like specifics around forage evaluation. But what I would say is more forage is better than no forage, if you know what I mean. So like, yes, it mightn't be the highest quality, but you know, even from that point of view, it can't be replaced by I suppose the
Bag
hard
feed.
feed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
maybe if you want to jump in there as well, Lydia, and give
yeah.
us
Yeah.
your take
So
on
I'm
hard
going
feed.
to preface it by saying I have no idea what sorts of forage you have available to you, but
Well, we don't have
uh,
bluegrass hay anyway.
do you have hay cubes or hay pellets? Okay,
We
so
do,
it's kind of
yeah, and
what
we have
Yeah,
chopped.
we do.
We could get chopped alfalfa as well, and hay. Yeah, there's some cubed
yeah,
hay.
it's kind of what Nikki was saying. Like the ideal for horses is long stem forage because there is something known as chew factor, scratch factor. They need those. They need to be chewing all the time, and they need their gut to have a long stem material in it for health. If you can't get that, then you go to the next best, which would be chopped hay, and the next best would be cubed hay, and the next best would be pelleted hay. But you need forage. Um, and grass would be best. I wouldn't go to like 100% alfalfa lucerne. Do you call it lucerne? No.
Oh
Okay.
God, we have
Okay.
no ag people
Um.
here, but we
I
just
know
call
Okay.
it.
Lucerne from Oz, but I don't know from here.
Yeah,
Okay.
Sorry.
I
Okay.
think
So
it's we've a
alfalfa. Yeah.
very kind of mixed kind of sward here. Tends to be a
Yeah.
lot of clover in it, and just generally kind of
So clover is
mixed
another
grass. Yeah.
lucerne. Yeah. So you wouldn't want 100% of that, but the research on, and you'll again in 2 months hear this. The research on gastric ulcers says that alfalfa hay can be preventative and used as a treatment for gastric ulcers. So a little alfalfa hay is a good thing. Can be a good thing. Um,
Okay, great, thank
but
you. Well,
yeah, I
there's lots
mean,
of
and I
questions.
think Nikki was one more thing. Nikki was very had really good foresight when she said that it's forage is important, but diversity of forage is important too.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean switching; it means including. And just one factoid for you, because it's like I said, that's the bacteria that are fermenting the complex carbohydrates in your long stem forage, and um, it's when you change diet and there's chaos, you change it abruptly. It's because the microbes are like, we don't know what this is. We don't know how to ferment it. And then some other, the opportunists come in and say, we know how to ferment it. Well, I will do it. Um, when you change hay quickly, changing hay it abruptly has a 10 times greater risk of causing colic than changing the concentrate or what you call hard feeds, um, because it's the hard feeds are digested by the horse and the horse's enzymes, but the long stem forage, the hay, is digested by the microbes, who maybe they're not the
Oh,
smartest, I don't know, but they seem to take a long time to adjust. So it's more important to
that's
keep
in.
to for the hay to be slow and gradual.
Okay, that's an interesting point because we certainly would have seen a lot of horses that get colicky when they switch from hay to haylage, and I've always just
Yes, big
assumed
one.
it was just the difference between the hay and
That's
haylage.
that's
But
that is why the microbes are like,
Oh, they have heart failure over it because there's so much
yeah,
sugar, right?
yeah,
And so there's a change in acid and the whole shebang. And the other big one that you see is like for instance, broodmares coming in for foaling, and they've been on grass for
yeah.
months, and then people just stick them in a stick them in a
And
stable and put them on hay, and then they get impaction, and like I can only imagine, like, having had two kids, like how it must feel like to come in and like a belly
well,
full of hay and you're about to have a foal. Oh my God. But you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah.
it's funny how we don't think of that, I suppose. And I wouldn't have either in practice. So
And
It's a
one
wonder
one
how
of you said
horses
this, and
survive with us,
I
with all the
know, I
things we
think this
do to
all the
them.
time. One of my mentors, when I started out, always said, "Don't worry, most of them will live in spite of you." And I was like, "Thanks."
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one of you said this, but whenever I buy a horse or I'm involved in any way in moving a horse from barn to one barn to another, I ask whichever barn I think is going to be friendlier, if I can have a couple bales of theirs
Yes.
to either start the horse
Okay.
on the new stuff, or can I take some old stuff with me and keep them on the old stuff as I work in the new?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
never
Well,
just
I'm going
take
to
a horse.
stop. Sorry, I'm going to
Yeah.
stop raising my eyes then at people who bring in their horse and bring in their feed with them, because
I
we're
used to do
usually
the
like, oh my
same,
God, we
Andrea.
have feed here.
I used to do the same, Andrea. But like, here they are now. Look at this.
Coming with their
More
feed.
hassle
Yeah.
for me.
That's it. Well,
Oh,
listen, I better get on to a
yeah.
couple of these questions. I mean, you have answered some of them, but I know there was one that you wanted to answer live, Lydia, which was a question asking, is it possible to test for inflammatory markers that could be flagged ahead of clinical
And the
signs?
only
I
reason
guess if we're not
I
using
flagged
symptoms
this one
for
is,
a condition.
yeah, I flagged this one because she said clinical symptoms for which condition. I wasn't sure what inflammatory markers for which
I,
condition. Do
w-
you
I
know what
would
she's
I would think
talking
she
about?
means I suppose maybe just general hindgut problems, or I suppose now that we've had the talk from Nikki as well, that just that the 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 microbiome is out of sorts, or that the hindgut's out of sorts. And I suppose that'll help a bit with that question, is I guess your blood markers, your serum amyloid A, your fibrinogen, the things that vets normally test for, are they going to
Yeah.
pick up an issue in this? I suspect they don't really, but maybe I'm wrong with that.
Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Let's go with
Okay.
it depends.
Right.
Never go wrong with that answer.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think, like one of the big things, like we did look into it in our lab at one stage, is we wanted to look for fecal calprotectant. It's something that they use in humans for IBD, and to differentiate between someone who has maybe IBS and is in a good deal of pain, and IBD, which would be more pathogenic in regards to the damage to the actual intestine. And they were able to use that to decipher whether or not there was damage to the cells of the gut, the hindgut. But we weren't able to come up with that. But that is, like, it's a great question, because it is something we want. It is something we want to do. We
Yeah.
want to be able to, even from the point of view of parasitology, that, like, because fecal egg counts are so, have so many limitations. Maybe we could have something that shows us actually there's been a ton of damage done by these parasites in the gut wall, and the gut wall's been damaged here, and we need to take a further look. And I agree with you, Andrea. There's plenty of veterinary indicators, but at what point, she was saying before clinical signs, you probably will have clinical signs once you have those. But definitely SAA, I suppose, Andrea, maybe we could.
Yeah, well, I suppose, SA probably is the most reactive one, or the most
Yeah,
sensitive,
well, most
the one of
sensitive. Yeah, but again,
sensitive thing.
it's reactive to everything, so
I
we'll
know,
it.
that's true. It could have a drop and have a massive SA. So I
Yeah,
have another
yeah,
question here. I've had to give my horse antibiotics this week. I think you
yeah,
probably sort of answered this, but maybe go over it again. How can I repopulate her gut afterwards?
yeah.
So,
And so again, it's that gentle approach. So probably keeping her on the diet that she's on, and just emphasizing slowly the forage element of that, because the antibiotics is going to do the most damage to the hindgut, because that's where most of our not all now, don't forget, but most of our microbiota community do hang out. So it's about, again, feeding that and making sure that you're trying to repopulate that by encouraging the community to propagate if it has been damaged.
And this
okay.
would be a place where I would recommend someone add some prebiotics
Yes.
or a product with prebiotics in, because those are going to assist and encourage healthy growth and rehabilitating. What is the word?
Yeah.
I'm looking for a word that means rehoming of bacteria.
Yeah. Yeah. Repopulating,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, repopulating. So it's since it's their preferred substrate and it's food they know how to um, metabolize, once you start rebuilding that population back, if their preferred substrate is there, they'll be even happier. When I used to teach more of this more often, I would say um, prebiotics are the preferred substrate of the the microbiome. Like my preferred substrate is Twinkies. I'm so happy and maybe not healthy, but I'm definitely happy when I have Twinkies. So I think of prebiotics as Twinkies for the good bugs.
Yep.
Twinkies are something we don't have in Ireland, but they're
Oh, you're
sweet,
missing out, you
sweet,
guys.
sweet cream cakes. No, I've had them.
You know,
That
speaking of sweet, I have a question down here. I think we can answer it quickly. It's any
yes.
recommendations regarding feeding molasses mixed with alfalfa? Um, I mean, I guess I'm not sure why you would do it except to tempt the appetite. If the only reason I can think of to do it is a horse it won't eat, but I generally, or if you're giving medicine, I generally don't add sugar to horses because even if you're not a metabolic horse, an easy keeper or a fat little pony, sugar just is not a good feed stuff for horses. I mean, they're trying to do naughty things with it, so don't let them.
Very
I
true.
would just like to answer another question here. Just I'm going to type in anyway, but the webinar will be available to rewatch on the Troella website. So that, and I know you'll probably have it on your own website as well, and maybe on the Succeed website,
Yeah.
but it will be on the Troella website
Here's
next
one. It
week.
says, "Can you give too much chaff?" And chaff is chopped hay.
Yes, chopped hay.
Yeah, I mean, if your horse is not used to it and has never had it, then yes. But if you've gotten your horse used to it slowly, I think your horse will just stop eating when they're full.
Okay, I think that is most of the questions answered. One point I wanted to come back to when I was looking at your slide, Nikki, when you saw all the research on human microbiome and the little amount on veterinary, and that
Yes.
just a little story. The time I met someone who said they felt the veterinary world was very far ahead was when I started to explain that we do transformation, which is the feces into
Yes.
humans. And at the time, this was a few years ago, that wasn't a thing in humans. And they said, my gosh, you're just so far ahead in veterinary. So I guess that's one of those situations where we got to do something
Yes.
that was very useful ahead of the human population. But it's good to hear that in humans they can go in the back end because I think there will be a lot of
Yeah.
resistance to the way we do it
And
in the veterinary
they
world.
cultivate it differently. Like, we basically get
Yeah.
feces and mix it up.
Yeah,
They get feces and they streamline it, and you wouldn't know
yeah.
that that's what's happening. Yeah. But
I
they
used to have a little cob, at home in our own place, and he was our donor because he literally was as healthy as a trout. He'd never had
exactly.
antibiotics. I think all he ever had was vaccinations, and
Yes.
he was just the most well animal, and he was used for pretty much every sick foal that wouldn't get better
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
few
and
years,
like I
and did
said,
a
I've
good
used it
job.
in practice myself. I was actually sent to an abattoir one time as an intern, of course, to get like the gut contents of some
Yeah.
poor dead animal to immediately dead animal to give to a horse as well. Yeah,
Can
so
I answer
look,
one? Oh, sorry.
no,
One
go
more
for
Yeah.
it,
question
Lydia.
before we're at what, sorry, 3:30 my time. I don't even know
Yeah.
what time is it there, 8:30?
No worries. 9:30, but
9:30.
we're okay.
Oh,
We're still going
goodness. Okay.
well.
This one is, could pre and probiotics reduce the need for the dietary transitions, or might they hide early signs of the gut imbalance, if that makes sense? Well, there's nothing you can give that reduces the need for the slow and gradual dietary transitions. That is the way you must do it, period. However, well, and they're not going to hide early signs. What the prebiotics or the food for the bacteria or the microbiome will do is assist in the transitions. They will make it easier for the bugs to assimilate the new food, but they're not going to reduce the need for slow, gradual change of diet, and they're not going to hide signs. They're merely aids. Would you agree with that or add something to it, Nikki?
No, yeah, no, completely
Okay.
agree. Yeah,
Okay.
I would have thought the same. And the hiding of the imbalance, I suppose the reference there is that let's say you gave a probiotic, when you took it away, would you then get a reactionary response in regards to
Yeah.
imbalance in the gut? I honestly couldn't tell you. Definitely I suppose you probably got from my slides, I would probably steer away from probiotics really. But yeah, like Lydia said, it's all about these things to be done slowly, slow and steady, basically. And most of the time the gut will just about keep up at that point. Yeah.
And I'm going to finish on one last question that I couldn't resist responding to that came in. And somebody asked about a horse with that it was a bleeder and was treating with
Oh,
antibiotics and hoping to run it again in 10 days' time. And was it doing more harm than good? But tricky to tell trainers not to treat. So I thought, yes, it is tricky to tell trainers not to treat. But I think you made a good point that I suppose these horses in training, their diet isn't ideal. They do get lots of antibiotics, but somehow they do adapt and they do go out perform quite well.
They
And
do.
just on a final note, the presentations have been absolutely excellent, and there's lots that we do that are wrong, and yet horses, in the most part, I mean, obviously there are lots of problems, but they do seem to cope very well with all the hurdles we throw in their
Well,
way,
sure,
and the chopping
think
and
about it.
changing and transporting to events and all the things we do to them.
But think of what we do to ourselves, Andrea.
That's
You
true.
know,
This is true.
when it
This
comes
is
to the
true.
gut microbiome, like think of what we do to
This is
ourselves.
true.
I had a good few cocktails last Saturday night, and I'm
That's
still
true.
here.
That's true. I was thinking about the few glasses of wine rather than the slice of bread,
Yeah,
probably is more upsetting. But anyway, but yes, that's a good point. I mean,
yeah,
the
we're all quite
the
resilient.
physiology, we're all quite resilient. But look, it's been absolutely fascinating. I think I really
Andrea, can I just
enjoyed.
put up my one
uh,
slide about my survey
Oh,
while you finish?
sorry. Yes,
Is
you
that
can
okay?
before we
Thank. Go
go.
ahead. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But to thank you both. Like it's been fascinating, and I think this is one that'll get rewatched. But yes, you had something you wanted to mention, Nikki.
Just yeah, one like just taking advantage of this opportunity, because we're doing a survey on parasite control. We'd love anyone who has any interest just to either it'll be sent out to you, click on it, or do the QR code. It works. I tried it on my phone, because we're just trying to get more of a sense of how people feel about parasite control, so that we can really get a feel for what kind of guidelines are needed, and particularly because of the introduction of POM. Let's not mention that in case it kicks off another
Oh God.
another thing of questions. So that's why we're looking across Australia, Germany, and Ireland, because Australia have
Great. Well,
no guidelines, Germany have guidelines, and we just got them. So thank you
Well,
so much.
I have just clicked on there now, so I promise I'll do that when we finish. We will
You're
put
so
it
good.
up on, so we'll send an email out to our community after this, so we'll put it on that as well. And thank you both so much. Thank you for your time. It was absolutely fascinating. I feel I know a whole lot more than I did an hour and a half ago. And thank you. Actually, an
me
amazing amount of
too.
people stayed on.
Yeah.
So that's always a really good sign in a webinar when people stay on to watch it through to the
Thank
end.
you so much
So
for having us.
thank you very much to everyone,
Thank you.
and we'll see everyone the next time in March.
In
All
two
right, take
months.
care. 2 months,
All right.
exactly. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.